What we'll do is this is what we'll try to cover. Try to talk about the concept of moving data into Azure. So we're going to start by talking about the concept of moving data into Azure. And this we'll be talking about the different, so you'll be using a tool like AzCopy, or we'll be talking about something like AzCopy, be talking about some things like ImportExport. We'll be talking about Databox. And what else? Let's see. I think that's kind of like the main ones. Then we're going to talk about the content delivery network. Oh, let's do Azure Content Delivery Network. And that's Azure CDN. And I'll try to show you a demo of that. And then finally, I'll talk about Azure File Sync. So this kind of like what we'll try to cover today, moving data into Azure, AzCopy, import and export, Databox, and the others. Talking about the Azure storage account service. Before I actually go into that, let me talk about something that I forgot to mention also. It's nice if I forgot to mention. Sometimes there's so much to mention that you don't want to pile everything into just one session. But let me share some information with you about this. Whenever you create an Azure storage account, it has keys created with it. So let me talk about that. So this Azure storage account, when it's created, it has two keys that created with it. Key number 1 and key number 2. And these keys are very important, they're very vital. Anyone that gets access to these keys get access to everything in the storage account. Not just like to a single service. That's these keys apply to the storage account itself, not to individual services. So anyone that gets access to these keys get access to the entire storage account. And you can see those keys if you go on the Azure Portal. And I'm under my storage account here, but here I have the access keys. And if I click on the access keys, I can see that there's key number 1, it gives me the connection string also. There's key number 2, and it gives me the connection string also. You want to be very careful with this. I mean, when we talk about the architecture course, we talk about security, we talk about a service called the Azure Key Vault, and you know, using services like that to do key management, enterprise-wide key management. That's very vital. Just to show you an example, github.com. Yeah, and let's search that again, and I search for how GitHub, and I'll search for code. And if you have a look, these are people posting up code on GitHub that includes information. In some cases, like this person has removed the key for that. But if you have a look at this one, that's the account name and that's the account key. Now, I'm not sure.
I'm presuming that's just incredible carelessness on their part, is it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
But again, it's very easy to do something like that, right? You're like, oh yeah, let's put this up on this one, and then you include the key into that. But and then you can have a look at that, and that's showing me about 630 key. Of course, not all of them will be valid, but you cannot tell me that there won't be one or two of them that will be valid, right? Of course, maybe this person created the account and deleted that like years ago, and that doesn't exist anymore. But probably one or two of that is valid. All of them is a simple Python script that will just run through that. But his thing is that we need to be very careful of this key because again, this is not just talking about key for a particular service or whatever. This is talking about whoever get access to this key get access to everything in a storage account. And what happens is the reason why we have two keys is so that we can rotate the keys. So the whole idea is, let's say I have an application and my application, let's say, needs access to this. Now, this is not best practice, but let's say, just for illustration purposes, I've imputed my key to this application so that this application can use this key to do whatever it needs to do on the storage account in the different services. So I've given this application this key. So what happens is I want to keep rotating the key every now and then. So that's the reason why we have two keys. Because what I could do then is I could go and I could change this application and change it to use key number 2. Then I'm going to go rotate key number 1. So let's get some diagram. I'm going to go rotate key number 1, so change it from what it currently is to a new key. And then what I can now do is I can take key number 1, put that, give that to my application to use, while I can rotate key number 2. So that's the main reason why we have two, so that we can rotate keys and stuff without looking access. So that's the main reason why we got like the two keys. But keep a hold of these keys. But there's a better method that Microsoft has so that is storage account keys. There's another method that Microsoft has called the SAS token. SAS stands for Shared Access Signature. And the whole idea is, rather than giving access to everything in the storage account using the keys, how about we can generate a token for a single object? So for example, for the blob storage in particular, we have a single file that we have in our blob. Let me go get a file icon over here. So let's say I've got this file in Azure Blob Storage. I can generate a single shared access token that will be signed with one of these keys, but it's a token that only gives access to this single file in this single blob in this blob service. And I can limit the access to say it's valid from this time to this time. Just let me go back to this. If I go back to my storage account and I go under my storage account and I go to under the blob service, and I create a container under the blob service, call it container1. And the public access level, you want to be careful of this. By default, it's set to private, no anonymous access. If you set that to blob anonymous access, that means anyone on the internet, if you don't add any other limitations, will be able to read the information for the blobs that are stored in this container. If you had container anonymous access, they will not only be able to read information for the blobs that are stored in the container, they will also be able to list the content of the container, like kind of like the folder structure. So these two must be used sparingly, except that's your purpose. Let's say you have a public website and that's your purpose to do that, that's fine. But in many cases, you're going to set that to private depending on the use case. And once I have that as private, if I go to try to upload a file into this, so I'll just upload that. So that's just a single one, and I go upload. By the way, if I click on this, you see that there's the option to upload VHD files as page blobs recommended, and that's ticked by default. So that if I'm uploading a VHD file, it's going to be uploaded as page blobs, which are optimized for random access. So, and then if I go ahead and I click upload to that, it's going to upload that. If I click on this, I get the URL for this particular object. If I try to access that URL, it's gonna say no, you cannot access. It's gonna say resource not found, but the main thing is because I have no access. So, but what I can do is, rather than trying to access this using the key, I can go to generate a SAS token. So you have to generate a shared access and secret token. I can go generate that token. I can grant whatever permissions that I want. So the permission to create, to read, or whatever. If I just say read access, I can set an expiry date for the token, and I can decide which key I want to use to sign the token. So do I want to use key 1 or key 2? The main thing behind that is, if you have multiple tokens going on everywhere, be careful if you rotate your keys. When you rotate the key, like every token that was signed with that particular key that you just rotated becomes invalid. So I'll just leave everything as the default, generate my SAS token, and if I get that's the SAS token there, but this is the URL with the SAS token already in it. So if I copy that and I go to somewhere like this and I paste that, now I get access to the content of what's in there. But I'm getting access specifically to only this object. So I'm not using the storage account key, and I'm not making everything public, just only to this object. Does that make sense? In the architecture course,
Yep.
there's much more
Yeah, I think so.
details that we go into in architecture course where we talk about security, but to give you some information about security, by default, this is available to everyone on the internet. If you want to lock things down with the storage account, you can always use things like the firewalls and virtual networks to lock it down, access from all networks or to selected networks, and you can put in your public IP address ranges here. Or if you wanted to, you could even give access to a particular virtual network that you have in Azure, so that any instance that you have running in that virtual network will be able to access the storage account. Why you limit access to everything else? So it depends on whatever method you want to use. There are many other things that we could go into. Things like encryption, for example. By default, there's encryption enabled at rest. By So the main thing is who is managing the keys. By default, the encryption that's enabled at rest, the keys are managed by Microsoft. Some people may not like that. They want to use their own key managed by them and whatever. To me, that means you're taking on extra management work and whatever. But if you wanted to, you could use your own key. So you could now go set up an Azure Key Vault service, generate your own key within that. Now you're responsible for managing it and looking after it. Give the Azure storage account access to that, and then now you're managing the keys that's used to encrypt the storage account and all the content in it. Um, there's also encryption in transit, which you'll find under configuration here. That this is, if I go to secure transfer required, that's enabled by default. So what this means is this means that Blob service, for example, supports access using HTTPS. If that is enabled, Blob service will only accept HTTPS access. If secure transfer is enabled, file service will not accept SMB version 1 or SMB version 2. It will only accept SMB version 3. So that's the implication of that. But again, those are security principles. Those are covered in much more details, the security, the architecture aspects of things in the architect's course. Okay, so where did I digress from? I was talking about, I was going to talk about something else and I remembered those. So moving data into Azure. So how do we move data into Azure? We have certain options depending on the size of data that we want to move. We have this option called AzCopy. Now, AzCopy is an amazing tool. It was created by the Microsoft storage team themselves. The Azure storage team created this tool. So it's a command line tool. It's available for Windows, for Linux, and for Mac. So it's a very nice tool. And one of the things about the AzCopy tool is because it's created by the people that created the Azure storage account, the Azure storage service, and they've optimized this tool in terms of transferring data into Azure Storage Service. What do you mean by that? Let me give you some information around that. So it's the storage account that I have here. It's the one of the main reasons why it's good to see this in a picture form, especially when I talk about the architecture course, is it helps to understand that once you get this understanding, when you're reading Microsoft document, understand that there's the storage account service, which is kind of like the parent service, and the child services under the storage account service. And whenever you're reading the document, understand which service this is referring to. Sometimes people read, whenever they read something about Blob, they accidentally apply that to storage account and they apply that to every other service. There are certain limitations that apply to storage account as a parent service that does not apply to the individual services. There are certain limitations that apply to the Blob service as an individual service that does not apply to the file service. File service has its own limit. And when you read Microsoft documentation, you must interpret them in such a way. Okay, is this talking about the storage account? Is this talking about the Blob service? Is this talking about the file service? Is this talking about table, queue, or data lake Gen 2 service? Which service are we referring to with this document? To give you an illustration, a storage account, for example, can go up to, if my number is still correct, 20 gigabit per second in terms of bandwidth, in terms of the rate at which you can transfer data into this can go up to 20 gigabits per second. Of course, that includes where you're transferring the data from, right? Do you have that amount of bandwidth really available between the link between yourself and this storage account? But if you do, the storage account can accept traffic at the rate of 20 up to 20 gigabits per second. Now, if you're uploading a single blob in the blob service, the maximum you can get up to is 480. So let's make that a bit smaller. Let's go 22. You can go to 480 megabit per second. What a tool like AzCopy is designed to do is it's designed, it understands this. Therefore, it's when you're trying to upload your blob, it's going to do parallel uploads, right? To try to get to it. So rather than just doing this, it's going to do parallel uploads to try to take advantage of this max and this bandwidth that's available at the storage account level. So rather than trying to limit itself to what the limitation is for a single blob. So it's going to do parallel upload, and that way it's going to do more optimized upload, taking advantage of the maximum bandwidth that's available here. Of course, again, that's always limited to the connection between the client that you're transferring data from and the connection that it has to the Azure Storage Account Service. But that's just telling you like the capabilities of what a tool like AzCopy has. And that's why it's highly recommended to use that whenever you're transferring data. So I'm not going to go through the pain of showing you how that works, but again, you know, you install it, and once you install it, maybe I should. Okay, you know what? Let's go. Anybody use Chocolatey before? Chocolatey?
Yeah, we use it in our office.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
We use it in our office when we're deploying new developer PCs. We use it to sort of automate deploying the list of standard developer software.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, it's a very nice thing, right? I'm not sure why it's not gained more popularity than it currently does.
We use it in our DSC process as well. So in the configuration data, it's just a list of Chocolatey packages, and DSC goes and installs them all.
Wow, that's amazing. That's very nice. Yeah, it's one that I've always found amazing. I'm not sure like why like in the industry I don't hear it like pushed out that much, but it's an amazing solution like you mentioned. The other thing that I'll do while I'm doing that is I'm gonna go create a directory structure with certain files. And let's go get the files that I want to create. So let's go. So here I'm just making. Oh, I think that's there's a bit of background noise now. Yeah. Thank you. So yeah, you can see now I've got like my, what's it called? I've got my folder structure all created. I've got this folder under the F drive called files. I've got 2 VHDs and 3 PNG files and stuff like that. So I'm going to try to use AzCopy to transfer this into the Azure storage account. So AzCopy, the syntax is very straightforward. If I'll just browse to the location, it's all right. I thought it had the location as part of the system path, but it's all right. So azcopy.exe. Yep, there we go. So here's the syntax. It's a very simple syntax that you use. Of course, you can add more complications to it if you wanted to, but the syntax is something as simple as this. Let's make that big. Yeah. So here, what it's doing is, azcopy, you specify the source. That could be local drive. That could be another storage account. Like then you specify the destination. If you're specifying a store source, which is a storage account, you need to specify like a key. So you don't have to use a storage account key this time again because this is now discouraged again by Microsoft. It's discouraged to use the key. You keep the key as as tight as possible. So what you can do these days with AzCopy version 10 is you can use your Azure AD credentials. So the credential that you use to log into the Azure portal, you can use that with AzCopy, and you can use that to authenticate rather than using the key itself. But to make things simple, I'll just use the key here. So I'm copying I'm going to copy documents that exist in from files into my storage account, and I'll specify the container to copy it into, and I'll specify the key. So what I'll do is I'll go back to my storage account quickly. I'll go on the properties. I'll grab the endpoint, which is my blob, and I'll go back to over here and I'll paste these here. So, and I'll go grab my key and I'll paste my key in destination key. So let's go grab the key. I can use any of them, key 1 or key 2, but I'll use key 1 over here, and I'll go back over here and I'll paste these. And you can just Google AzCopy, go to the document, and you see a lot of the other parameters that are possible. So copying things from F files, you can actually specify and say only copy files with this extension and other stuff if you wanted to. So let's go back to my server and let's paste that. Let's present it to that. And it's beginning the upload. And it's going to try again to take advantage of the capabilities depending on the link that I have to the Azure Storage account, take advantage of that. And this is almost 2 gigs of data that I just transferred, and that's just a few seconds that AzCopy has copied it. Hopefully that makes sense regarding AzCopy. So general recommendation is if you're transferring anything that's less than 1 terabyte, I believe. Let me just verify that. So anything there that's less than 1 terabyte, you can use AzCopy. Actually, there's no real limit like that. You can, if you want to transfer something that's 3 terabyte or even more, you can transfer it using AzCopy as long as you're okay to use the bandwidth connection between wherever you're transferring from to Azure storage. That's fine. You can do that. So the other option, there's something called an import-export service. This one is a bit different. The way that the import-export service works, it's kind of like a very interesting service in terms of it's a postal service, but you're using the Azure Portal to specify it. Okay, here we go. Here's a disk. So I've got my disk that contains my data. So maybe I've got 10 of them or whatever. I think you can only go up to a maximum of 10 at a time. My disk contains my data. What I do is, number one, I go to the Azure Portal and I set up an import-export job in the Azure Portal. So that's the first thing that I do. So number two is I download a tool provided by Microsoft. It's called the WA Import tool. And I download this tool and I use this tool to prepare my drives that contains my data that I want to send into a storage account in Azure. So this tool, what it's going to do is it's going to prepare the drives that contains my data. It's also going to encrypt them using BitLocker. It's also going to create journal files if I'm doing an import job. It's going to create journal files for me. So I set up an import-export job in the Azure Portal. I download WA ImportExport tool. I use it to prepare the drives that I want. And once I've prepared this drive, then I package this drive and I send them by courier service to Microsoft. Microsoft gets the disk, and then they transfer the data that's on this disk. They transfer that into my Azure storage account. So that could be Blob, file, and I believe table also. So either Blob, file, or table, and one. So you specify. So they transfer that data into Blob, files, or table. Once they transfer the data, they ship your disk back to you. That's like an offline transfer. And I'll show you because obviously we don't have any disks to use. But yeah, you can see my container is there. It's created my container over there, and I've got all my files over here. So good. So what I'll do is if I go back to create a resource, and I'll search for import export job. So import export job. And if I go to create that, and you can specify if you want to import into Azure, if you want to export data from a storage account to back on premises, anyone. So that's why it's called import export. So import into Azure, I'll call it import my data 01, whatever. Specify the subscription, the resource group that job is going to be created in. Then you specify your job details. So this is where you go to download the WA import export tools. And if it's an import job, it's going to prepare your drives and it's going to give you the journal files. So then you come to upload the journal files here, which will contain things like the encryption keys and the others. So it's going to import the journal files. You specify the storage account that you want to put this data in. You specify the drop-off location that you're going to ship it to. Do you want to ship it to UK South or wherever? You specify the drop-off location. You specify your return shipping information. You click OK, and then you're done. If it's export job that you're doing, export job does not require creating the journal file. So again, you just prepare your disks and using the WA import export tool, you specify the storage account that you're transferring the data from, ship them to Microsoft. They will copy your data onto this encrypted, and then they send it to you. And if you go to the export job in the Azure portal, you'll be able to see the BitLocker keys that they used to encrypt that over there. So that's the way that works. So that's offline transfer. So typically, if you're transferring anything that's greater than 1 terabyte, again, remember, whenever I say this, this is not like the gospel. This is not like oh, it's more than 1 terabyte, I can't use the AzCopy anymore. No, that's not the way. So it's just these are just generic recommendations. You can take them as really nothing, right? It's just to highlight like kind of like the different capabilities when you want to move data. So that's the AZ import export option. Then there's the other option, which is, I think this one is greater than 1 terabyte and less than 40 terabytes. That's kind of like the recommendation that I believe I saw. So less than 40 terabytes. But again, take that as nothing. Then we have the Azure Databox. So Azure Databox, I will actually take you to the Azure portal and I'll show you what these are. So the thing with, because people ask this question, what's the difference? Because Databox sounds very familiar when I describe it to to import export. So what's the difference between Databox and import export? Because it also involves you copy your files offline to some disks somewhere, and then you send them to Microsoft. The difference is when you're using import export job, these are your disks. These disks belong to you. If you're doing import, you send them to Microsoft, they transfer to the storage account, they send them back to you. If you're doing export, you send them to Microsoft to transfer your data into them, they send them back to you. This belongs to you. On the other hand, if you're doing Azure Databox, any of these options here, and permit me to do a quick screenshot here. These storage facilities don't belong to you, they belong to Microsoft. These are Microsoft provided storage. So you go into the Azure portal again, similar to like what I described. You go into the Azure portal, you create a Databox job. So Azure portal, Databox job. And then once you order that, Microsoft ships the data box to you. You transfer your data into the data box, you send them to Microsoft. So with these ones, you can use them for import, but not for export. So, but this belongs to Microsoft, not to you. So you have the disks, you have the bigger data box, you have Databox Heavy, and you can see what the different capabilities are here. So this one can go up to 100 terabytes. This one can go up to 40 terabytes, which is the smallest one. So the disks, they will send you a bunch of SSD disks up to 40 terabytes. You go for the data box, you get 100 terabytes. You go for the Databox Heavy, you can go up to 1 petabyte of data to the cloud. It skipped my mind. They had something called Snowball, which if you look at Snowball, Snowball is Databox. So AWS had this for a very long time. And actually AWS, they have something even much more powerful. So they also have like the equivalent of Snowball, bigger Snowball and stuff like that. But look at this. They have this thing called Snowmobile, AWS Snowmobile. You want to see what that looks like? Let me show you the unveiling of AWS Snowmobile at the reInvent conference. Yeah, I think that's it. So this is the unveiling
A number
of
of our
the
customers said, well,
AWS
this is great
Snowmobile.
if I have hundreds of petabytes or...
So this is where they unveiled it at the AWS reInvent conference. And Snowmobile, come on. And essentially what they did was they drove this huge truck to the stage. And you can order for one of these. And they'll send one of these out to you to take your data. So if you have massive petabytes of data that you need to transfer, order for one of these AWS. And I can almost guarantee you that in the next 1 year or 2 years, you'll see Databox Mobile, something like that. Because that's on the way. I can almost guarantee you. And they'll actually send armed guards with these things. Right? So it's like a really crazy service that they offer. But again, all these different cloud providers trying to outdo themselves, like all the time. But that's the way Databox works. So again, it's similar. If I go to the Azure Portal, I go to create a Databox. I go to create a Databox order job. So cancel that, create a resource, and I go this time around. Come on. Okay, let's go back. Let's go Databox. So Azure Databox. And if I go to the Azure Databox and I click on create, it may not allow me because I have a free account. And I want to import data into Azure. So you see there's no export. So source, specify United Kingdom, destination, United Kingdom, UK South. So this is where I live and then where I want to send it to, UK South. And then I click apply. Then it's going to give me the option that's available. Of course, because of my service, it's going to say, sorry, David, you can't order for this with a free account. So, but yeah, you see, I can go specify Databox disk. I can select and order that, Databox there or Databox heavy, and then they'll ship those all off to me. I transfer my data to them, and then I send that back to them, and they'll charge me for that service. Any questions regarding those options for moving data into Azure? Any questions at all?
Do they have any like time SLAs or anything on them?
For those, I'm sure that it is a good question. You mean for the import export and the data box?
Yeah.
I'm sure that they do, but I don't know that off the top of my head. I'll take that down in the notepad and I will check that for you.
That's cool.
So SLA for import export and data box. I'm sure that they do. And it's actually very good. It's a very good question. It won't make sense because I'm sure that these are not cheap services.
No.
So I'm sure that they have like some form of SLAs with them. So those are the options that we have.